He was a broke law student. She was a 70-year-old millionaire widow with a chilling offer. Marry her, and every problem disappears. At first, it seemed like a miracle. But just days after the wedding, Jim uncovered a terrifying truth. She had planned this marriage for years, and he was never supposed to leave. What he finds next changes everything. Before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. A heavy gray sky loomed over Bellwood, North Carolina, casting a somber tone over the quiet college town. The streets were slick with rain as Jim Wable trudged along the sidewalk, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his expression lined with concern. At 25, he was balancing his final year at Eastbridge School of Law, a part-time job, and the crushing debt left behind by his late father. Every day felt like the world was pushing in tighter. His phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him out of his thoughts. "Jim Wable speaking," he said. A composed, authoritative voice answered. "Mr. Wable, this is Alice Bowman. I'd like to meet with you. It's regarding your financial situation." Jim's brow furrowed. "I'm sorry, who are you? How do you even know?" "I know enough," she cut in smoothly. "Meet me at Bowman and Company. Cafe, 7 p.m. It's important." The call ended before Jim could respond. Confused but intrigued, he arrived at the upscale cafe that evening. The rain had picked up and his thin jacket was no match. Stepping inside, he was greeted by the warm glow of pendant lights and the rich aroma of fresh espresso. At a corner table, a woman sat with the kind of composed elegance that turned heads. Alice Bowman, her silver hair was styled immaculately, her tailored suit radiating wealth and refinement. "Jim," she said, gesturing toward the seat across from her. Her voice was calm but firm. He hesitated before sitting down. "Mrs. Bowman, what is this about?" "Straight to the point." "I like that," she said, stirring her tea. "Jim, I know about your debt. The burden your father left you with. I know you're struggling. I'm here to offer a solution." Jim narrowed his eyes slightly. "And what kind of solution would that be?" She placed her cup down gently, her piercing blue eyes locking onto his. "Marry me." The words hit like a thunderclap. Jim blinked, sure he had misheard. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Alice replied, her tone unwavering. "This isn't about romance, Jim. It's a business arrangement. I will erase your debts, provide you with financial stability, and in return, you will become my husband." Jim let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You're serious? But why me? You don't even know me." Alice leaned forward slightly, her voice cool and composed. "That's precisely why. You're young, unattached, and desperate enough to consider this. I don't need love, Jim. I need a partner, someone to share my name and my estate. Think of it as a contract." Jim shook his head, trying to keep up with the absurdity of what he was hearing. "This is insane. What's in it for you?" For the first time, something softer flickered across Alice's face. "I've spent most of my life alone, Jim. I have no children, no living relatives. I want companionship even if only for appearances. And I want control over my legacy. A husband gives that structure." Jim stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the polished floor. I can't. I need time." "Of course," she said, unfazed. "But don't take too long. This offer won't last forever." Jim walked home in a daze, the rain soaking his clothes, but he barely noticed. That night, he sat across from his mother at their small kitchen table. Her skin looked paler than usual, the toll of her ongoing treatments evident in her tired eyes. His younger sister's college fees hovered over them like a guillotine. When he told his mother about Alice's offer, her reaction surprised him. "Jim," she said softly, "I know it sounds unthinkable. But if she's offering to help, maybe you should consider it." Jim stared at his hands, struggling with the conflict raging inside him. "You want me to marry a stranger to fix our lives?" "I want you to survive," she said quietly. "To save yourself. And maybe save all of us in the process." The following morning, Jim returned to Bowman and Company. Cafe. Alice was already there, poised and calm, scrolling through her tablet as if she'd never left. Without glancing up, she spoke. "You've made your decision." Jim inhaled deeply. "I'll do it." She smiled faintly, placing the tablet aside. "Good. We'll make the necessary arrangements right away." A week later, Jim stood inside the Bellwood courthouse, dressed in a tailored suit Alice had provided. The ceremony was brief, almost clinical, witnessed only by her attorney and a notary. As they exchanged vows, a creeping unease settled deep in Jim's chest. When the officiant finally pronounced them husband and wife, Alice turned to him with a perfectly controlled smile that stopped just short of reaching her eyes. "Welcome to your new life, Mr. Wable." Outside, a soft drizzle fell from the sky. Jim looked down at his reflection in a puddle on the courthouse steps and wondered, had I just saved my family or condemned myself? The gates of Bowman Estate creaked as Jim's cab rolled slowly up the long, manicured driveway. The mansion loomed before him, grand, opulent, and intimidating. Towering white columns framed the front entrance, its stone facade gleaming under the damp sky like a monument from another century. But the windows were dark, lifeless. Jim stepped out of the cab and clutched his suitcase, feeling more like a trespasser than a husband. Alice met him in the foyer, as perfectly composed as ever. "Welcome, Mr. Wable," she said, her formal tone chilling. "I trust you'll find everything to your satisfaction. Dinner is at 7. A housekeeper guided him to his room, lavish, with a king-sized bed, antique furnishings, and tall windows overlooking symmetrical gardens. Yet, despite the luxury, the room felt hollow, untouched, like no one had ever truly lived there. That evening, Jim sat stiffly at the long dining table. Alice was seated at the opposite end, dressed in a pale silk blouse, a string of pearls around her neck. The meal was exquisite, prepared by a chef Jim hadn't seen, served by staff who moved in silence like shadows. "I trust you're settling in," Alice said, slicing neatly into her filet mignon. Jim hesitated. "It's different. This place is so big, I feel like I'll get lost." Alice offered a brief smirk. "You'll either get used to it or you won't. Either way, you're here now." Jim shifted slightly in his seat. "You never really mentioned much about your late husband." Alice's knife paused mid-cut. She dabbed her mouth with a linen napkin. "He was a businessman, like your father. Their paths crossed once or twice." Her voice darkened. "But not all meetings end well." Jim's pulse quickened. "What does that mean?" She met his gaze, her eyes sharper than before. "Let's just say some things have a way of lingering." She raised her wine glass. "You'll soon understand why I chose you." Her cryptic words left Jim with a chill. After dinner, Jim wandered the cavernous halls of the estate. The silence was nearly oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the wooden floors beneath his feet. He passed several locked doors, heavy, old, their brass handles gleaming under dim light. Something about them felt intentional, as if whatever lay behind them wasn't meant to be disturbed. Over the following days, Jim's unease grew. The staff avoided eye contact. Conversations hushed when he entered a room. They moved with a practiced quiet, like they had secrets stitched into their uniforms. And then one evening, as he passed the kitchen, he heard whispers behind a partially closed door. "Why him? Does he even know?" "She never does anything without a reason. He'll figure it out eventually. They always do." Jim stepped away before he was noticed, a cold sweat rising at the base of his neck. That night, while pacing the dimly lit library, Jim noticed something strange. Alice's desk, usually pristine, was cluttered, papers scattered, a drawer half open. As he stepped closer, a glint caught his eye. An ornate silver key, small but weighty, lay just beneath a stack of envelopes. He looked around. No one. His pulse rising, Jim reached for the key and slipped it into his pocket. Later, lying in bed, he turned the key over and over in his hands. Its surface was cool and slightly worn, as if it had opened the same lock many times before. What was Alice hiding? And why did she really want him here? The mansion was cloaked in silence when Jim crept through the hallway hours later. The key felt heavy in his pocket, like it carried not just metal, but consequence. He stopped at one of the locked doors he'd passed earlier. Its carved wood was dark and polished, the handle elaborate and cold to the touch. With a final glance over his shoulder, Jim inserted the key into the lock. A quiet click. The door creaked open. Inside, dust floated in slivers of moonlight. The room was untouched, furniture draped in sheets, wallpaper faded, the air thick with time. On a desk near the window, silver-framed photos sat in a neat row. Jim stepped closer. There she was, Alice, decades younger. Beside her, a man he assumed was her late husband. And another couple. People he didn't recognize. But it wasn't the photos that made his stomach twist. It was the stack of documents on the desk. Legal papers. Financial records. His father's name. And then, beneath it all, a letter, written in elegant, angry script. "You ruined everything. My family was left with nothing because of your lies." And just beneath that, a marriage license. Jim's name and Alice's. But the date? It had been signed weeks before their wedding day. Much earlier than he ever knew. Jim's hands trembled as he reached for the final item on the desk, an old, leather-bound diary. His heart pounded in his ears as he opened it. It was Alice's handwriting. Meticulously written entries filled each page. Plans. Observations. Calculations. His name. Page after page detailed her strategy, her reasoning. "I will take everything from him, just as his father took from me." He'll never see it coming. He'll be my pawn. Jim staggered back from the desk, nausea rising in his throat. This marriage had never been about companionship. It wasn't a business arrangement. It was revenge. A voice sliced through the darkness behind him. Enjoying yourself? Jim spun around, his breath catching in his throat. Alice stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her silhouette framed by dim hallway light. Her expression was unreadable. Alice, you thought you'd find answers here, she said calmly, stepping into the room. Curiosity is a dangerous thing, Jim. He clenched the papers in his hand. Why did you really marry me? His voice was low, firm. Is this all because of my father? Am I just part of your twisted revenge? Alice's mask cracked ever so slightly. Her eyes narrowed. It's not your place to ask questions. She moved a step closer. You signed the papers. You accepted my offer. That's all that matters. Jim's jaw tightened. You manipulated me. Lied to me. This isn't a marriage, it's a prison. A small, humorless smile tugged at her lips. Then maybe you should have thought twice before agreeing to the terms. Jim barely slept that night. Her words, the diary, the documents, everything buzzed in his head like static. He needed a way out. But Alice, she wasn't going to make it easy. Later that night, as he passed her study, he heard her voice. Low, commanding. Make sure the transfer is completed. We can't afford for him to get cold feet. Time is running out. Jim's stomach dropped. What transfer? What else was she planning? The next morning, he approached Mr. Holloway, the estate's head butler. A tall man with quiet eyes and the demeanor of someone who'd seen too much. Mr. Holloway, I need to ask you something. The butler looked at him evenly. I was wondering how long it would take before you came to me. Jim's throat tightened. You know what's going on, don't you? Mr. Holloway nodded slowly. You're not the first young man Alice's brought into her world. He paused, then added softly. She's intelligent, strategic, and she never plays a game she doesn't think she'll win. Jim's chest tightened. Then why do you stay? Holloway's expression darkened for the first time. Some of us don't have the luxury of leaving. Jim knew he couldn't handle this alone. That evening, he contacted an old friend from law school, Eric, someone he trusted. They met discreetly in town under the pretense of catching up. Eric, Jim said, keeping his voice casual, hypothetically, if someone signed a contract under pressure, coercion even, could they get out of it? Eric frowned. Hypothetically? Maybe. Depends on the evidence. Why? Jim forced a laugh. It's just for a class project I'm helping someone with. Eric didn't press, but his eyes lingered a little too long. Back at the estate, Jim spent every spare moment searching through Alice's study while she was out. He combed through drawers, scanned file folders, and reviewed decades-old letters. And then he found it. An envelope. Yellowed at the edges. Sealed. It was addressed to his father. Inside, Alice's handwriting, angry and pointed. You destroyed everything. My husband died from the stress. My family was left in ruins. And you lived in comfort. I will not let your bloodline go unpunished. Jim felt his hands go numb. This wasn't just about money. This was years of bitterness. Grief twisted into something sharp and dangerous. She blamed his father for her husband's death. And now Jim was the sacrifice. He returned the letter to its hiding place, his mind already working through a plan. He had to get out, and he had to stop her. But Alice Bowman had always been a step ahead. The next morning, as he sat in the breakfast room trying to eat through a fog of anxiety, she entered the room with her usual elegance, but something was different. Her presence was heavier. You've been busy, haven't you? She said, not looking at him. Jim froze. His spoon hovered over his bowl. I don't know what you mean. Alice gave him a slow, dangerous smile. Don't insult me. I know exactly what you've been doing. She stepped closer. If you think you can outmaneuver me, you're mistaken. I've dealt with men twice as clever as you, and none of them succeeded. Jim met her gaze, steel in his eyes. I don't know what you're accusing me of, but I haven't done anything wrong. She laughed quietly. If you betray me, Jim, you'll wish you hadn't. The air in the mansion thickened in the days that followed. Jim could feel it. A shift. A watching. Everywhere he went, he felt like eyes followed him, behind doors, around corners, in reflections. The staff said less than ever. Even Holloway avoided prolonged glances. Alice had tightened her grip. But Jim wasn't about to give up. That evening, he met with Eric again, this time bringing everything, the diary, the letter, the forged dates. Eric flipped through the documents with growing alarm. This is enough to bring a case, he said. Fraud, coercion, conspiracy. But you need to move fast. If she catches on, she could destroy the evidence or disappear. Jim nodded. She already suspects something. But I can't let this continue. Eric placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Then we do this together. No mistakes. The next morning, Jim sat in the grand sitting room of Bowman Estate, his bag beside him, filled with the evidence he and Eric had gathered. He didn't have to wait long. Alice entered the room, graceful as ever, her expression unreadable. "Jim," she said smoothly. "We need to talk." He stood, steadying his breath. "Yes. We do." She raised a finely shaped brow, unimpressed. "And what could be so urgent?" Without hesitation, Jim opened his bag and laid the documents on the coffee table between them. "I know everything," he said. Alice's gaze flicked to the pages, and for the first time, her composure cracked. "You've been snooping again," she said quietly, a dangerous edge in her voice. Jim stepped forward. "I know what happened between you and my father. I understand your pain. But what you've done, what you're doing now, this isn't justice. It's destruction." Her jaw tightened. "And what about my family? My husband? Do they not deserve justice? He died from the stress of what your father did. We lost everything." Jim's voice rose. "I didn't do anything to you. I was a child. You targeted me because I was vulnerable. That's not justice, it's revenge." Alice's eyes flashed. But then something changed. Her posture softened just slightly. "You remind me of him, you know," she said. "Of Harold. That same spark. That same stubbornness." Jim hesitated. "If that's true, then stop this. Let it go. It's not too late." Before she could answer, the sound of tires crunching on gravel cut through the moment. A beat later, uniformed officers stepped into the room. Behind them, Eric. "Alice Bowman," said the lead officer, "we have a warrant for your arrest. You're being charged with multiple counts of fraud, coercion, and conspiracy." Alice didn't move. For a moment, she looked at Jim. Not with hatred, but with something closer to resignation. "You called them." Jim met her eyes. "You left me no choice." The officers approached. As they took her gently by the arms, she turned back once more. "You may think you've won, Jim," she said coldly. "But revenge, it never ends where you expect. Be careful it doesn't consume you too." Jim didn't reply. He watched silently as they led her away through the doors of the estate. Relief washed over him. But so did something else. Something heavier. A few weeks later, in court, Jim gave testimony not to destroy Alice, but to ensure the truth was told. Her sentence was reduced. Not out of mercy, but because he understood something now. Revenge is a prison, too. As Alice was led from the courtroom, she looked back once, her gaze softer than he had ever seen it. She gave him a small, almost regretful nod. Days later, Jim was summoned to the estate one last time. It felt different now, quiet, but not in a threatening way. Empty, but not ominous. Alice's lawyer handed him a letter and a deed. The estate was now his. He opened the letter. Her handwriting was clean and elegant. "It was never about the money, Jim. It was about closure. Harold deserved justice, but somewhere along the way I lost myself. You reminded me that there's still a way forward. The estate is yours now. Make it something better than I did." Jim didn't hesitate. He sold Bowman Estate without a second thought. The sprawling mansion had been a gilded cage, both for Alice and for himself. With the proceeds, he paid off every cent of his family's debts. His mother no longer had to worry about medical bills. His sister's college education was secured. And with what remained, Jim created a scholarship fund. He named it after the man whose death had unknowingly fueled years of grief and vengeance. The Harold Bowman Scholarship for Second Chances. 1 year later, Jim stood in a quiet auditorium before a small crowd of students, the first recipients of the scholarship. Behind him, a simple plaque hung on the wall. The Harold Bowman Scholarship Fund for Second Chances. Jim cleared his throat. "This fund isn't just about money," he said. "It's about giving opportunities to those who might otherwise be overlooked. It's about turning pain into purpose. About choosing hope when revenge would be easier." After the ceremony, he stayed behind for a while, seated alone in the front row. The past year had changed everything. And yet, for the first time, he felt like he was finally heading in the right direction. As he stepped outside into the afternoon sun, a soft smile crossed his face. The sky above was clear. And in his pocket, Alice's final letter remained. A quiet reminder of what they had both come to understand. About legacy. About justice. And the quiet power of forgiveness.